military affiliation. And so we might not realize it here so much in San Diego, but across the nation, 6.6% of the American population are veterans. And that's actually a shrinking number. 3 months ago, it was 6.7%. But it's shrinking because over 50% of that number are over 50 years and older, and unfortunately are passing on. And we're not replenishing that number with our younger service members because we only have about 0.4% of our population are actively serving. And so what we've seen is a smaller representation of our military in the greater community. And this divide growing between the community and the connection to the military. Not only with the military members, but then also just what it means to serve in the military and the values associated with that. And some of the things that come through are stereotyping and stuff like that. But a lot of it is from a lack of communication across that boundary, which is one of the things we really want to explore tonight. So I wanted to pose to you, why does that conversation not take place?
Yeah, I think that it doesn't take place because of fear. Civilians, let's call them civilians, non-veterans, are always sort of a bit worried about, well, I don't want to say something stupid to this veteran, or I don't want to say something that'll upset this veteran. So maybe the best thing to do is to keep quiet about it. And there's also, in our country, in general, there's sort of a code about, veterans have to sort of follow, which is you can't brag. We don't like braggers. And you can't complain and whine. And my experience of the military is that it's 95% things to whine and complain about, and about 4% things to brag about. So that doesn't leave the veteran very much to talk about either, because there's this cultural thing about you don't brag and you don't whine and you don't complain. So, okay, so what we can talk about what, and there's that. And then I think on the veteran side, we have to own a few things. First of all, there's just fear of being judged. Any veteran who's been in combat has very likely done something that they're not real proud of, because you do terrible things. And you're raised in a culture that thou shalt not kill, and then you kill somebody. And even though you can say, well, it's my duty, and you have all these excuses, the basic fact is that you've basically violated a norm of the culture that you're trying to reassimilate to. And so you go like, well, maybe I just ought to keep my mouth shut because I don't want to risk, having the conversation go dead at the dinner table because I say something that everybody goes like, that feeling. And the other issue is that I think, again, veterans need to own is that we get a little cocky. It's sort of like, well, you don't know what I've been through. And I think there's not a veteran in the house here that does, I feel that. It's like, what do you know? You've never seen combat. I've seen combat. Well, if you set yourself up as somehow superior to somebody else, that's a gap. That's an alienation. That's something that splits you apart. And you have to sort of, the analogy I use is, suppose every woman that had gone through childbirth said to everybody else, you don't know what I've been through and I'm not going to talk to you. Well, it's silly. You will never understand if you're a man or if you're a woman who's not had born a child, what it's like to have childhood. That is no reason that the woman is superior to you or that you shouldn't talk to them or anything of the sort. It's just a different experience. And yes, some of the experiences are hard, some of them are horrific, but that doesn't make you better than somebody. That makes you somebody with a different experience. And to get that in your head as a veteran is sometimes difficult because you like to sort of feel superior. Who doesn't? And so I have to watch myself. I have to watch the ego. So I guess the answer is you got a culture of that encourages you to keep your mouth shut. You got civilians who are afraid. They're afraid of the veteran getting angry at them. And I tell people, I say, look, if you got a veteran that you love and he's not talking to you, you're going to have to open up first. You're going to have to go there and you're going to have to just be brave, and he'll tell you, get the F out of my life and I don't want to talk about it. Okay, that's the first refusal. And you're gonna have to get 3 or 4 of them out of the way, so you might as well get the first one out as soon as you can. All right, and then you go through the second one and just keep at it. You have to have the courage to do it. And I always tell people that the thing you have to think about is not think about this person as a veteran. The minute you think of a person as a veteran, that's putting them into a group. And he or she is an individual. And so you don't ask questions about veterans, and I certainly mean the cliche, did you ever kill anybody? I hope nobody's that dumb. But honest to God, I've had questions like that. But you treat them as an individual. That's why thank you for your service to me is such a cliche, because you're not really engaging with that person. Thank you for your service is an easy way out. This is just another category of person, and I owe them a thank you for your service. Now I'm done. You have to approach them as individuals, and that's real simple. You just start like, gosh, what do you guys eat for breakfast? Okay? I mean, when you were talking about, what was the worst place you ever slept? I mean, those are human questions that human beings, individuals, can answer. And believe me, veterans want to talk. I mean, all this stuff about, I don't want to talk about it. That's what that is saying is, I don't want to say something that's going to make you think I'm a bad person. Or I don't want to feel the feelings that I know are stuffed down inside. I don't want to talk about it. It's actually not what they're saying. They're saying something else with that language. They do, I guarantee you, want to talk about it. But they want to talk about it and feel safe, not judged. And they want to be seen as a person. And the way you get to them is you treat them as a person first. I mean, if you're in the airport, you don't say thank you for your service and walk on by. You sit down next to the kid and you say, where were you? Were you in Afghanistan or were you in Iraq? Oh, what did you do there? You were da 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 da. This is a conversation with a person. And I guarantee you'd probably have a hard time getting away from the kid. So I think that's where I come down on this.
One thing that I've seen with the separation of military and non-military and this growing divide through that lack of communication is, we put them in a box. That's the military. I don't believe in war, or I don't align myself with that. And that's kind of the easy way out, because that puts that group over there, and I'm over here, instead of realizing that the military is part of our greater community. But we ask a lot of a small number of people to act on our behalf when it's part of a greater system.
Yeah.
And could you elaborate on your thoughts?
Yeah, I use this analogy. There's a rifle, and what does it take to build the rifle? Scientists who are taught by second grade school teachers, factories where they have factory workers and that are financed by bankers, and all of these people are fed food by farmers, and it's sort of this Buddhist chain of connection and being that is going into making this rifle. And at the end of this long interconnected chain, some 19-year-old pulls the trigger. He did the killing. He did the killing because he pulled the trigger. No, we did the killing. And it's an unconscious attitude in this country that we are not responsible. Nobody is clean. If you drive a car, you're driving gasoline whose price is determined by what's happening over in Iraq, all right? Nobody is clean. Everybody here has probably had some part of building that weapon. It's just because we're in an economic system and society where we are enormously interconnected. And the country has to start to own that he didn't go to war, we went to war. This kid's part of going to war was pulling the trigger of the rifle we built. And I think we need to start breaking down this attitude that somebody else did. Because that's the beginning of the alienation of the military from the civilians. And the other thing that I think that we've made a mistake with the all-volunteer military. I call it the all-recruited military. There's a big difference. Volunteers are the guys that when Pearl Harbor got bombed, they rushed down to the post office and said, we're going to go fight. Those are who I call volunteers. I don't impugn in any way the patriotism or the generosity of spirit of the people that are in the military, but you've got to admit that most of the country says they volunteered. They're getting paid. There's this attitude again, which sets up this dichotomy between the military and the civilians. And I think that we ought to just, do national service. You can't draft everybody. And believe me, I have 5 kids, and at least 3 of them I wouldn't want. Just wouldn't want. 2 would be okay. But they can teach kids how to read in the inner city. They can build, fix potholes. They can be at the airports, shaking me down. I'd much rather have my daughter do that than, some of the people that are doing it. And there's a lot of work to be done. And then out of that group of people, let them volunteer to do their 2 years or 3 years or 1 year, whatever it is, of national service as in the military. So then the national service is just, the military is just part of national service. We're a republic. We pay our taxes. And believe me, I wouldn't pay my taxes if I didn't know I'd go to jail if I didn't do it. I don't like paying my taxes, but then my brain says, you're part of a republic, and you owe the republic part of your income to keep it going. And in just the same way, you're part of the republic, you owe some of your time. What is the money that you're sending to taxes? It's your time. You just do it in a different way. And I think that, again, if we all started to see that national service was what's going on, and your particular form of service is teaching kids how to read, and my particular form of service is being a Marine or an airman, there's a lot less of a sense of the difference between us. It's just the skill set that you happen to have and the inclinations you happen to have. I'd much rather do the Marines than teach kids to read. They'd hate me. Because I lose my temper. So I think that's another issue we have to think about.
So to take from your personal experience, and I'm going to still put Bill Moyers in this question toward you. So having been an individual that has killed on behalf of the nation, can you ever feel as though you are part of the whole again?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yes, of course. But it's a lot more nuanced. First of all, there's sort of, I call it interlocking circles of community. There's my family. I can feel part of that. And then there's, people I work with. You see where I'm going. And let's face it, as each of these expand, you have less and less connection. At some level, being an American is really an abstraction compared to being a member of the Marlantes family. And so when you're saying, can you ever feel part of it? To what level can you feel part of it in any case, whether you've been in the military or not? So that's the first thing that comes to me. The other thing is that when you come back, you do have to recognize that you now have a different perspective than most of your fellow citizens. And that can lead to you feeling alienated. I'll tell you, 4th of July, when the fireworks are going off and people are going, woo, I don't even go. Because when I hear the Star Spangled Banner, bombs bursting in air, I have images in my head that most of those people do not. Does that make me superior to them? No. Does that make me feel different than them? Yes. I kind of go I think this is kind of lame, sitting out here and cheering about bombs going off in the air. I just think it's lame. Well, that's my opinion, and I try to sort of, keep it to myself, except in audiences like this, but it's the way I feel. So there is a sense that I'm now a bit different and in some ways alienated from what I would call the more unconscious people. I cringe when people treat war like a football game, and our television networks treat it like a football game. I cringe. Day 17 of the war in Iraq. It's like day 17 of the Olympics. But I'm going, what are you guys doing? This is serious stuff here. It's not football. It's not even the Olympics. It's people killing, right? So that will never change for me. And I think that a large number of Americans are still into the football sort of thing. It's a matter of consciousness. And I'm hoping that they'll come along at some point, probably not in my lifetime. So yes and no. I mean, I feel very easy to, work, write my books, talk to people, and I was in business, and most veterans are. I mean, the image of veterans is homeless guy out on the street. I mean, we're talking about 1/10 of 1% of them. All the rest of them are successful, and they're not victims. That's the other thing I just get. This thing about the poor veteran, my analogy there is it's like, okay, there's the classic. The girl's tied on the railroad track, and the train's coming down the track, and the villain's tied her up, and so a guy runs across and ties her, throws her off the track, but he doesn't get out in time, and the engine runs over his leg. Is he a victim, or is he a hero? He's a hero. And you shouldn't feel sorry for him that he was a victim. You should feel sad that he lost his leg, because that was something that nobody else wants to do. But to say that that's a victim because he lost his leg, when he chose to go take the girl out and actually did, we have to, as a community, we have to start switching. It's like, we need to compensate people who have lost their legs. We need to give them training about how to walk again, and we need to get them jobs, and we need to do all those things. Not because they're victims, but because they did something for the Republic that we didn't do, and they did it, and we all are part of the war, and since that, we're all part of the healing from the war. So I don't like this thing of veterans as victims. And believe me, again, on the veteran side, I know guys who milk the VA for everything it's worth. I mean, I know them. And it's human nature. Why should I work when I can, figure out a way of getting 100% disability when I really am not 100% disabled? I'd really much rather fish on the government's behalf. I mean, it's human nature. We have to accept that that's kind of who we are, and just watch out for it in ourselves. When you see it in other people, you just have to go like, well, I hope I don't do that.
So you brought up the healing from war, and you alluded to it as a society. But when we have these barriers, we kind of expect our individuals and the military as a group to heal, and heal on behalf of the society. But this is another reason to kind of cross that boundary so that we can come together, because we do need to heal as a greater community.
Yeah.
And so more on the individual experience, and you talked a little bit about it in one of your earlier answers on the first thing we ask a member of our military when they join and expect of them is to bring our base morals associated with our culture. Thou shalt not kill.
Right.
And you're in this job to kill somebody in some way. So we teach them to do that as a military and as a society. But once they exit the military, we don't talk to them about the consequences or how to deal with that. How would you recommend we move forward or work with that?
Yeah, it's a big part of my second book. Like I said, the Marine Corps taught me how to kill, but not how to feel about killing. And that's not the Marine Corps' fault, and it's not the Marine Corps' job. The Marine Corps and the Army and the Navy and the Air Force are really there to defeat our nation's enemies. If you happen to kill somebody in the course of that, that is the correct attitude. I mean, we got into a real mess in Vietnam with body count. Instead of seeing the war and the strategic ends of the war, which were really hard to understand at the time and still are, we got into body count, which was, we're here to kill people. The military is not here to kill people. The military here is to carry out the nation's will and objectives and protect the people of the Republic from other people doing violence to them. In the course of that, you do have to kill people. That's a very big difference, though. We're not training them, to be killers. We're training them to protect the Republic, and in the course of that protection, it often involves really dissuading somebody from trying to hurt your people, which is by killing them. Where was I going?
It's a shift in the messaging.
Huh?
It's a shift in the messaging that we're sending.
Yeah, and the question was how does the nation sort of deal with this? I'm lost.
That's okay.
All right.
It's something we need to work on.
Yeah.
We teach them how to break morals.
Oh, I'm with you there.
But
yeah.
We're not
Now I'm back.
telling them how to deal with the consequences.
I'm getting really old. The thing is that the way that the human body heals is through the inside out. We're not like turtles or insects. We don't have a hard shell. That's the way those animals protect themselves. Human beings take the hit. I mean, you take the wound, and then it gradually heals because your immune system kicks in and blood cells start to create. So we heal from the inside out. So you can't tell a kid ahead of time anything that's going to make him not take the hit of having killed somebody. It's a wound to the soul because not only is it sort of, our basic Judeo-Christian culture, it's also, I think, innate in us that you don't want to kill somebody of your own tribe, your own family. And at what extent does that stop? Well, if you're really conscious, it's everybody. So you're going to take the hit. But what you can do ahead of time is you can tell people, someday you're going to wake up, and it may not be when you're 25, it may be when you're 55. And you're going to realize at that time you pickled that 500-pounder, it not only took out some Taliban, but it took out the wife and a few kids. Or even it's just the Taliban, and you wake up in the middle of the night and you realize that this was a human being. This was a human being who had ideals that he thought was worth fighting for. Unfortunately, he was on the other side. And you're going to feel bad, and you're going to feel guilt, and you're going to feel all these things. But if you start to tell somebody ahead of time what they're going to feel and how to think about that, when they're 20 years old, they're going to ignore you. Let's face it. I mean, they're going to go like, I don't want to listen to this. I want to have a beer, right? I mean, I know Marines. They're not going to. But if you at least tell them ahead of time, someday this is going to start to weigh on you. And here's some of the symptoms. If you start to do this, if you start, screaming at your kids, or if you start to sort of withdraw and not talk to anybody anymore, if every 4th of July you go fishing in Canada, I mean, you're going to have to start thinking about what's really going on. If they're warned ahead of time to watch out for the symptoms of the effects of killing on their souls, on their psyches, they'll recognize them way faster. The healing process will be accelerated. But they'll take the hit. But by education, just simple education, as soon as the first intimation of, oh, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's bothering me. Because you can go for years with this vague feeling of guilt, this vague feeling of something's not right. But if somebody articulated it for you when you were 19 years old and said, someday you'll wake up and feel like this. When you do, you go like, oh, I get it, this is what's happening to me, and the healing process is faster. So I think that's the role that the military can provide, early in training, just that. But we can't expect them to fix it after it's done.
And we had a discussion about this earlier today in comparing our kind of war stories, if you will. And you were 23 when you went to Vietnam and had your experiences in Vietnam. And I was in the Marine Corps at 18, but it wasn't until I was 29 years old that I found myself going into combat. And I think there's an adult development spectrum there in the sense that I don't associate it with age, but sometimes it is associated with age. And there was a difference between 29-year-old Derek and 23-year-old Derek on how I processed that. And I actually went through a conscious loop of how am I going to deal with this?
Right.
And I think it is directly related to what you said as far as the ability on the backside to work with it was enhanced. Yeah.
And I think that the other thing that the society needs to understand is that the best warriors are 19-year-olds. They're the best. You don't want to be in the platoon with a 35-year-old and say, we're going to take the hill. Wait a second, Lieutenant. Where's the Air Force? Why don't we find them for, you just don't want anybody.
We never did anything done.
That's right. The 19-year-olds say, yeah, let's go do it. And they'll go, 40 days without food and water, and they'll do it. But they're the absolute not person to ever do any reflective thinking. I mean, their frontal cortex is not developed. I mean, I've raised 5 kids, and I can shout at them, it's raining outside, take your raincoats, bye Dad, you know, and they'll come in soaking wet and cold, and it's like, you know, I told you to take your raincoat, you know, they don't, their brain isn't there, they're not one step ahead, I'm sorry. So the best warriors are the least. And again, all you can do, it's sort of like, I was at a reading and some cynic in the background said, I don't get it, what you're trying to tell a bunch of 19-year-olds is like trying to teach kids Shakespeare and Tolstoy when they're sophomores in high school, they don't get it. And I said, yes, it's exactly like that. Exactly like that. When they're sophomores in high school, you give them Tolstoy and Shakespeare, and then when they're 40, they'll actually read these guys and understand them. But if you didn't tell them when they were, you know, in high school, they wouldn't even know that there was somebody they should read. It's the same thing with your 19-year-olds. They're going to ignore you, but you've got to give them the lesson, and then you hope that when they wake up at age whatever it is, they'll go, oh.
We've been, a group of us have been working with the Marine Corps Recruit Depot on a oral history project that I mentioned called Dialogues of the Experience of War. It's people about my age that have left their service, and most of them are Marines and one sailor. And across the room kind of realized at one point that if you have participated in combat and have participated in killing, at some point you're going to ask the question, was it worth it? My experience is that most of the time we get there and it's like, well, no, it wasn't.
Yeah.
But, and I think that's along the lines, that's why we don't have people my age and your age and others fighting wars.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, your frontal cortex presumably had developed by the time you were 29. Mine was just starting to coalesce around age 23. I was still, you know, racing cars when I shouldn't have been and that kind of stuff. But yes, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's something that we just need to take on board.
So you were very honest in what it is like to go to war, and that's one of the biggest things that I appreciate about that book. And you explored kind of multiple personas that you had, especially around killing. And one of the topics that you talked about was the pleasure of killing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I have to say that when there were several times when there was a great satisfaction in pulling the trigger. And I thought about it a lot. And what I've come down to is that there is part of us humans. I mean, okay, we are the top animal on the food chain. Undisputed top animal on the food chain. We didn't get there because we were nice. All right? We are not nice. We are really a mean, savage little primate. That's deep inside us. Civilization, which is our brains, our minds, is what keeps that in check. But it's a spider web. I mean, you just watch a mob. I mean, you see it on television. It's like suddenly there's people that are ordinary and normal, and suddenly they're snarling at each other and throwing things or shooting each other. I mean, we are on the verge always of this, what I call the mad monkey, just coming out. And that mad monkey gets a savage delight out of doing in the enemy. And I think that where it comes from is a very primitive thing about killing another animal, because that's how we live. You know, when we say we're the top of the food chain, what that means is that we're eating the ones that are underneath us. And nature would put in you an aggressive side that would give you pleasure in making the kill. Because it feeds your family and it feeds you. I mean, that's the way the species survives. So you hear a lot of people say, oh, we should be nice and we shouldn't dehumanize people and stuff. I think that we need to back up a little bit and say, where we start from is that we understand that we're really aggressive and mean. And now the job is how do we control those things in ourselves? And one of the ways that we have learned to do that, and I don't think anybody teaches us this, it's a psychological trick, is what I call pseudo-speciating the enemy. We don't kill human beings. We kill krauts, we kill towel heads, hadjis, gooks. That's who we kill. What are we doing? We're actually saying that we're not killing people, and we're allowing that animal instinct. We're killing animals. This animal over here is trying to hurt my friends. And so when I do that animal in, there's a savage joy. And if you don't own that, I don't think you're honest. And there's going to be a lot of people that just hate to hear me say that. And I'm going like, well, I think you're fooling yourself. You don't think you do that. If that animal was trying to kill your baby, you would, damn, I got him right between the eyes. And I write about it in the book. And I'm embarrassed about this. There was a recon team in trouble. And by this time, I'd gotten out of the bush and I was flying in the back seat of an OB-10 or an O-1 Charlie. I was in their observer. And the recon team had been fighting off an NVA unit. They'd gotten up to the top of a hill, but they'd gotten into a hasty defense. And there was a lot of NVA coming up the hill at them. And I managed to get a couple of Phantoms in and hit them with napalm. And when that was over with 500-pound bombs and napalm, and I looked down on the carnage below, and there were bodies burned, and there were limbs shaking, but the recon team was saved. And what did I do? And it's in my book. I shouted out over the net, "We've got crispy critters all over the hill." That is not something I should have done. I should have had more maturity. I was really young, but I have to own that I was really excited about bombing and burning a bunch of NVA to save that recon team. I think if I was 40 years old and had the same job, I'd still do it. I mean, I would save the recon team and I'd bring in the 500-pound bombs and hit them with napalm, but I wouldn't exult over it. But I wasn't, when I was that young, in control of that impulse. So the maturity is the ability of your ego to maintain the control over our animal instincts, and that's what we call civilization.
I appreciate your honesty. You talk about, of course, having to deal with that after the war and not realizing how to deal with that for decades.
Right.
Can you expand on that experience?
Yeah, I had never heard of post-traumatic stress. I'd never heard of moral injury. I mean, a lot of things have improved because I think the culture in general, I mean, there's movies now that you see the veteran, and the veterans generally now dealing with post-traumatic stress. I mean, it's in our culture. But when I came back from the war, not only did we hide, but nobody had ever heard of that stuff. Even though, I mean, Craig Lockhart Hospital in England had dealt with post-traumatic stress in the 20s, had learned virtually everything we know about it today, but all the records were lost and thrown away, and by the time World War II came around, nobody remembered it. And then in World War II, the psychology rate of wound rate was 25%. 25% of our casualty rate were psych rates, which we don't like to think about. Americans don't think crazy, right? And then we forgot that by the time Vietnam came around. So I came out of the war with in a sort of a blank, and started doing odd things. I can only describe that frightened my children and frightened my wife and frightened me, because I thought, what's going on with you? A couple of examples. I mean, they're kind of funny, but I mean, I'd hear a noise outside on the street, and I'd be out of the house and out on the street looking for where that noise comes. Start naked, and then all of a sudden, what am I doing out here? Or I told this story. I was in an intersection, and I couldn't quite figure which way to turn, and some guy blasted the horn behind me. And I came to my senses on the hood of his car trying to kick his windshield. And my little girl Sophie was in the intersection, left in the intersection, the car engine running, wondering what's Daddy doing kicking this guy's windshield, And I had no idea that this was a symptom of post-traumatic stress. I just thought it scared me. It was like, God, what's going on with you? Why would you do something crazy like that? I don't even remember leaving the car until I woke up on the top. Well, it's classic post-traumatic stress. I mean, when you're in combat, your brain rewires. Normal way of the brain working from an impulse, an input, you hear something. It goes from the ear through the frontal cortex, and then finally works its way around to you having a reaction. You hear something, frontal cortex path is like, I wonder what that is. Let's see, it could be a bird, maybe a leaf or a twig fell in the forest. maybe the wind blew something. By the time you've gone through this route, you're dead. So under extreme adrenaline loads, the brain rewires, and it sends it directly to the amygdala. So that if there's something that you hear a sound, you have just 3 reactions: fight, flight, or freeze. And since you're trained in the military to fight, that you just turn around and shoot, and then that saves your neck. Trouble is, you can't rewire. So when someone scares you by blasting their horn, there's no thinking. I didn't think. I wasn't even conscious until I kind of came to my senses on the hood of this guy's car. But I had no idea what was happening. And so, I mean, my family was kind of worried. Her dad's a little weird, and I was kind of worried. But I didn't know. I thought, well, maybe job stress or whatever it was. And my wife said to me, she says, there's a workshop, a bunch of psychologists are looking for, patients in there at the local school, and it's about job stress. Maybe you ought to go. And so I thought, yeah, maybe I should go. And I went down. There's about 70 or 80 people in the school cafeteria, and I was sort of sitting around. Well, my wife may be going. I really didn't want to. Anyway, I get up to the table, and there's a guy sitting across from me. Yes, can you tell me what? So I tell him the story like that, and I tell him the story about I bumped my head against the kitchen cupboards, and I took them out with my fists. Literally, food, cans, glasses broken all over the kitchen. Hands bloody, and my family's watching me do this. And I relayed a couple of stories like those, and he just looks at me and he says, "Were you ever in a war?" And I broke down bawling. Snot coming out of my nose, sobbing. I was uncontrollable bawling. I had no idea. And then that's how I started the healing process. He wrote on a book, he says, Larry Decker, Veterans Outreach Center, such and such a street. He says, I want you to go there now, not tomorrow, not this afternoon. I'm calling this guy on the phone. You have something called post-traumatic stress. Have you ever heard of it? No. Well, you got it. And this guy knows how to deal with it. You go see him now. I'm calling him on the phone. You go see him now. So I had this card in my hand. I stumbled down the street into this Veterans Outreach Center. And the psychologist there, his name was Larry Decker. And he set me down, and that's how I started to learn about it. It was just sort of the grace of my wife saying, maybe you ought to go talk about this. So when I came back, it was a vacuum. We don't have that. There's less of an excuse for people like me.
So you talk about, in dealing with it, turning your ghosts into ancestors.
Right.
And for our adult development folks in here, I refer to it as moving from the subject to the object. So you have this internal piece of you. If you don't have an impact on it, it has an impact on you. You can't see, you can't deal with it, but you work on putting it out in front of you so you can have an impact on it, work with it, see it, do things with it. Can you explain what you mean by ghosts and ancestors?
Yeah. Ghosts haunt you. And so ghosts are the things that are inside that you are not aware of. The ghosts are what make you go to the bar and drink too much, or try to take a guy's windshield out, or worse. And what you need to do is turn them into ancestors. What our normal, a lot of people's strategy about the ghosts is to kill the ghosts. Well, I'm going to just get rid of them. I'm sorry, you can't kill the ghosts because they're part of your personality. I did these things in Vietnam, which have caused these ghosts to live in me. They are part of me. The way that you have to do it is you have to own them. And the way you own them is by turning the ghosts into ancestors, because they will be part of your personality. They will be part of your personal history. They are who you are today. How you killed, how the cowardly thing you did, all of those things, you need to put them out. And I did it by writing. There's a lot of ways you can do it. You get the ghost out. You can tell stories to people that you trust. You can do paintings. You can do photography. There's poetry. The arts are very important to getting the ghosts turned into ancestors. And then, as Derek was saying, once they're out there in front of you, they're still part of your psyche. They're still who you are, but they're no longer running your life. You're just accepting that, and you're seeing them for what they are out there in front of you. I've written it down. I see it. I buy it. I accept it. I did these things. It's who I am. And quite frankly, I like who I am. So I have to accept that part of who I am is this darkness, that I was also who I am. And what the feelings about that change from guilt to what I call more legitimate feelings, like sadness. I mean, I'm sorry that I shouted at those crispy critters, that we made a bunch of crispy critters. And those people were dying a horrible death. So I feel sad about that now, but I don't feel guilty about it, because like I said, I'd do it again. I just wouldn't gloat over it. So I have to own it. I gloated then. I'm not going to do that anymore. I've learned. I've grown. So that's part of my ancestors. See, so I can change the way I feel about my actions by examining them and getting them out front and owning them. I don't know. I'm no psychologist, but I think a lot of guilt is trying to pretend that you really didn't do it. Psychologically, sort of thinking I'm perfect, so therefore I can't admit that I did something like this, and so that festers with you. You just say, I did it. I'm not perfect. I really did kill it. Okay.
And that's the individual. So moving forward as a society or a community and trying to work towards that healing. In the past, Sebastian Younger refers to this when he talks about, Native Americans used to have ceremony at the end of a conflict. The warrior class would return and have a ceremony. They were back part of the community, and the community moved on. What would a ceremony look like today?
Well, first of all, we have to have a declared beginning before we can have a declared end. When does the war in Iraq end? When did it start? Congress never declared war. And I think that's something we have to examine as a culture. So we have to say that it's over. What is it that's the signal to the community that it's over? That's one thing that we have a problem with right now. When are we going to win? Right? Or when are we going to say we quit and we lose? I don't care what it is. But so first of all, we have to define that. So that's the first thing about a ceremony, is that you have to say it's over. If you haven't admitted that you began it, you've got a problem. So that's problem number one. Number two is I think it's wrong to cheer at the end of a conflict. The reason that we were at war was because the adults failed. If the adults had done their job right, they would have made a deal. We would have gotten what we needed to do, or we would have compromised to get what we wanted without having the kids go in and have to clean up the mess. So why would we be celebrating what was essentially a failure of diplomacy? The feeling should be gratitude that at least these kids came home, and sadness. My view of it is that you have the church bells ringing, that it's over, and it's a long, mournful ring, and the kids are walking, instead of a parade with the batons in the air and the bugles and everything, the rifles are slung upside down, and we're walking up the street in gratitude and near silence because of the sadness of what we've just finished. And then there's a pride that we did our part, and that when that quote parade is over, you go to the family that you're coming home to, and they welcome you home, but you don't cheer. It's just the wrong thing to do. It's cleaning up a mess, and I think that we have to grow up, but we do need to have ceremonies. The other thing is, it goes back to my rifle thing. When the Native Americans went to war, the whole village went to war, because the hunters, who usually provide the meat, weren't there anymore. Everybody knew that the war was on. And so when they came home, there was like a gratitude that it's over, because now there's no leverage of that. And we can start to live better lives again. And we lack that. I think they ought to put a tax on every April 15th that says line item 17, war in Iraq, $1,320 per share, so that the community is understanding. And if it's a war that's legitimate, I'll pay the money, And when it's over with, guess what? The line item goes away. See, because we have to get more conscious about this stuff. The primary thing is it's nothing to cheer about. And I think that we do need ceremonies and things like the two that come to my mind, church bells, solemn ceremonies, parade, remembrance of the people that died. I would even think some sign of sadness that of all the people that were killed that weren't on our side. I mean, think about, the innocents that you killed in war, collateral damage. There's no avoiding it. You try as hard as you can, but as human beings, we should also include them. When the war is over, it's like, it was a failure that we went to war. And now we cleaned it up and it's over with, and I'm sad for these people too. I think it's just brings your humanity back. Parades and fireworks denies that humanity.
An interesting thing happened to me this week. So I was in Iraq in 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7 during Operation Iraqi Freedom, which started in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And this week I was at the museum here, at the local museum, and was looking at one of the signs and it said Operation Iraqi Freedom, 2003 to 2010. Well, I was pretty involved in that conflict, and I didn't know there was an end
Right.
point, and because it seems like we're still involved. So I felt like I should have gotten a note.
Yeah, dear Derek, the war is over. Sincerely, whoever. Yeah.
But I didn't get that. So I want to do my James Lipton moment with my final 3 questions.
Explain James Lipton.
Yeah, James Lipton is the actor's studio, and he has. I'm not going to steal his questions about what's your favorite swear word or anything like that. But there are 3 questions that I'm stealing from him, and I'm stealing from Justin Hudnall, who's here from So Say We All. And he likes to say that when you meet somebody outside of the military, they have 3 questions that they want to know the answer to. Why did you join? What did you do? And how are you different? Now,
how am I different from what?
How you were prior to the military. Now, the what did you do isn't an acronym-filled response of things that I have no idea what the heck that means or anybody else. But really, what was it, in a sense, though, to an outsider? So
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on why did you join, what did you do, and how are you different?
All right. When I was raised, I was a little kid during the 50s. I was a teenager during the 60s. And there was a word used for people who had been in the military, and it was called the service. We call it the military today. Well, that was when your dad was in the service. That was when your uncle was in the service. And I think our language reflects a fundamental shift. We now say he was in the military. I don't hear the word in the service very often. I'm old talking about it. So I grew up in an environment where there was a draft. That was always hanging over your head. And then there was that all the people you admired in town had been in the service. And so, as a young man, it was sort of like, well, that's sort of what I have a responsibility to do myself. I'm the next generation. And so there was a big component of that. And there was also a component, like I said, the draft was like, nobody wanted to be drafted. We were going, oh, please draft me. It was like income tax. You know that you had to owe the government some of your time to defend the country, and if they tapped you, well, you do your 2 years and do it, with some pride. And it was like paying taxes. But it was an obligation of a citizen of the Republic, and so that was also there. Then there's the usual young man stuff. I mean, I can remember guys on the football team all wanted to be in the Marines, and so they would disappear to someplace called San Diego, I mean, up this logging town in Oregon coast, right? And they would come back with something that we had never seen before, called a suntan. And they would walk up the main street of Seaside, is called Broadway, and that's where the taverns are. And they'd walk up and down that street like they owned it, and they were 4 inches wider in the shoulders and lean and full of piss and vinegar. And I'm 15 or 16 and going, I want that. So there's a lot of that component to why I joined. I want some of that. And then there's sort of like maybe I could be a hero. Gosh, maybe I could be John Wayne. You know, I mean, again, young people join the military, generally speaking. You know, and so it's young person's fantasies. So patriotism, I wonder if I can do it. I want some of that. And then there was something that probably fairly unique to me, and there's a funny story that goes with it, but I started reading Kierkegaard when I was in high school, and he's all about choice. And I was all, and about the depths and the heights of life and having to, encounter it all. I'm 15 years old and it's raining outside and I'm reading this crazy Danish philosopher called Kierkegaard, and I got to do something. I got to make a choice in my life. I got to make some big decision to define who I am. I mean, that was all in my head too. And that was going on. And so I joined the Marines, and when I told my parents about it, my older brother, who was a businessman, I mean, he was a great businessman, being the president of Rockefeller Center Incorporated. And he said, let's go down to the called the Seaside Grill. It was open all night. He said, I need to talk to you. And he set me down. He's 2 years older than I am. He said, why did you do this crazy thing and join the Marine Corps? There's this war starting up. This was 1964. And he says, we're going to get into a war there. And he says, it's going to be stupid. And he said, what did you do this for? And so I gave him this whole thing about Kierkegaard. And he looks at me and he says, so you wanted to make a big choice. Why didn't you just choose to go to business school? I'll never forget that, because I'm sitting there in Vietnam and I'm going like, why didn't I just choose that? That would have satisfied Kierkegaard just fine. So that's why I joined. All of the above.
And then what would you say that you did while you were in the Marine Corps? I mean, I know you were an infantry officer.
Yeah. Well, wow, that's it. Well, I accomplished the mission. I think you could put it just that bluntly. And I tried to accomplish the mission with as little damage to my side as possible. I didn't care much about the other side. And I feel like, generally speaking, I did. We took the hill when we were told to. We abandoned it when we were told to as well. It really hurt. And we did that over and over again. But as far as what I accomplished was just that. I remember writing a letter to my parents, because I'd gone to Oxford, and I started feeling bad because the Marines had let me go. I won the scholarship, and there I am, having beer in the taverns and the pubs, and hanging out with the girls, and guys that I'd gone through training with were heading to Vietnam, and 5 kids in my high school died there. Only about 2 or 3 by that time, but there's only like 30 boys in the class, so it hit us pretty hard. And I'm having a good time, so I felt guilty, and so I decided that I would send in a letter and go. And I wrote to my mom and dad why I did it, and I'm part of this Ken Burns documentary, and they said, do you have any old letters or anything? And I had looked at old letters for a long time. I dug up, my golly, there's a letter from me at Oxford explaining to my mom and dad why I wanted to join the Marine Corps. And I was kind of amazed to read my reasoning, and that the decision was different. I joined the Marines for the reason I told you, but now, years later, the war is not looking like World War II. It's looking a little dicey. And why would I do this? Well, one is I still wanted to know what it was like. That was a personal thing that I had to own. I wonder if I can do it. I wonder if I can go to war and do it. But the other thing, which I wrote, and I was trying to be honest, and it sounds a little grandiose, but I really meant it, is that I thought I'd be a pretty good officer. And I said that I know that if I go over there, I'll get the mission done, and I'll try and save as many lives as I can getting it done. And I honestly believe that about myself. And I look back on it, and I made mistakes. I didn't do it perfectly. I tried real hard, and I feel pretty good that I did a good job.
How do you think you're different now?
Well, I think one thing is I'm really far more tolerant of people in tough situations. I saw people fail under pressure, And I made a few mistakes myself under pressure, and so I sort of have become more tolerant that way. I think that a big difference for me was religion. I talked about this just was it this morning or something? I'm losing track, but we were surrounded, and we'd taken 2 assaults already. There was no way of getting resupply because it was monsoons and we couldn't even see where we were. We were up in the mountains, so there was no possibility of resupply. We redistributed all the ammunition. We were down to 7 bullets. I remember each of us had 7 bullets, and there was going to be another attack. And it was all over. I was in my fighting hole, and I looked at the dirt that I piled up in front of my fighting hole, and I grabbed some and I put it in my hand. And I almost started weeping with the beauty of it. I had never recognized how beautiful just the earth was, because I figured in about an hour or so I would not be around it when it was coming. And that made a huge change in me. And I forget it a lot, but every once in a while I remember, like if things are bad, I remember Karl, I remember the dirt, and the beauty of being alive, and the beauty of the planet, and just the mystery and the beauty of it all. And luckily, the clouds lifted, and we got in air support, and we got in choppers and reinforcements and more ammo. So I'm still here talking to you today, but I was that close. And that's what was a profound change in my whole view of life, is that just being able to hang on to that dirt, you are really fortunate. You are really alive, and you just savor it, because tomorrow you may be hit by the bus. I'm always aware of the bus might be hit.
Well, thank you for answering these questions. We're going to take some time and open it to the audience. Everybody here has some questions, please.
Karl, you spoke of your pending documentary with Ken Burns. Mm-hmm. Anything terribly new from talking with Ken on what you might you write something new about Vietnam as a result of your time there with Ken Burns? And let me comment that my combat was at 40 as a rifle platoon leader, and I thought it was easier. I was so much older than my Marine subordinates that it just took my mind off of me.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I'm going to write anything more about the war or war in general. I've got other books that I want to write. But the Ken Burns documentary, I learned a lot of stuff that is going to, it sort of like surprised me. It's going to surprise a lot of Americans. I thought I was fighting Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was out of power in 1965. We didn't even know it. I mean, talk about intelligence failures. I mean, it would be the equivalent of fighting the Germans and not realizing that Hitler had gone to Stockholm. You know, there all this thing about Quezon. Well, General Giap, the genius that defeated the French at Dien Bien Phu, he's going to do it again at Quezon. And the situation was entirely different, because through very hard fighting, we held the hilltops, not the NBA. Big difference. But anyway, Giap had been exiled to Hungary. He wasn't even there. And this stuff has come out over the last 40 years because they're getting records from North Vietnam now. And they've got presidents, Kennedy talking to his brother, Johnson, Nixon, all saying things on telephone that had been taped that were the absolute opposite of what they were saying to the American people at the same time. And it's going to come out in this documentary. It's going to be like, whoa. They've got a tape of Lyndon Johnson lying to Richard Nixon. And it's classic, because Nixon had called, the peace agreement was almost in place in 1968 before the election. They needed 4 signatories: the Viet Cong, the South Vietnamese government, the North Vietnamese government, and the United States. When those 4 would sign, we would have had peace. All right? October of '68, we by that time had only lost, I don't know, maybe 20,000 people, but not 59,000. We had the North, we had the Viet Cong and the Americans ready to sign. The South hadn't signed yet. Lyndon Johnson, because he had CIA working inside the South Vietnamese government, learned that Richard Nixon called the president of South Vietnam and told him not to sign it because he would get him a better deal because he was going to win the election. Now, Johnson couldn't tell Nixon that he had spies inside the South Vietnamese government, but they've got a tape of Johnson calling Nixon on the phone, and it's classic. Here's this Texan, well, Richard, I hear, you know how rumors go around Washington. I hear you've been talking to President Chu over there about this peace agreement we're trying to put together. Oh, no, Lyndon, I would never do anything like that, you know. No, that's a complete rumor, you know. I mean, it's there on tape. It's really, and so, yeah, I learned a lot. I'm not going to write about it or talk about it, but I think that we're learning a lot about that war. That, you know, as in all things, when the secret files start to get released, we're learning more and more. And it's going to be a great documentary. I think it's 20 hours long. It's going to be as good, better than this Civil War documentary.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you again for writing that book. It's amazing. It's touched a lot of people, and I really appreciate making time to talk to you before this and everything you said. I listened to everything you said tonight, and one thing I wanted, if you wouldn't mind expanding on, is I think that the arts help you turn ghosts into ancestors. I've read your books, and it seems that there's some degree of journalism there. I'm not taking away from any of your creative abilities, but when you say the arts help turn ghosts into ancestors, could you expand on that a little bit, please?
Well, what I meant by that is that the arts in general are what you think about as bringing something inside and making it manifest outside. I mean, what is the creation? I mean, there's nothing. There's a blank sheet of paper, right? Where does it come from? It doesn't come out of the air. It comes from here, and then it goes out. And the arts, what I mean by that, in general, I mean, if you can expand on it, it's anything that brings what's inside out to where it can be seen, brings it to consciousness. And the arts are an easy, immediate way of doing it. But there's probably dozens of other ways of doing it. Like I said, just sitting around the campfire talking to a couple of old veterans might be the way you do it. Journaling might be the way you do it. I mean, that's the sort of writing for yourself. One of the things you have to watch with journaling is that there's two things I was talking about with a guy. First of all, if it's a really nice notebook, you tend to think, well, I don't want to put anything in here. Because you don't want to ruin your notebook. Get really crappy paper, 3-ring, just get spiral binders, 19 cents, Fred Meyers, and write in that because you want to just write stuff that with flow. You don't do any self-editing, and it'll be 80% crap, but that's fine because that's exciting. Get it out, But so that's the first thing, and the other thing about journaling is that if you still keep it to yourself, there's something about sharing it with the community that's important, because the stuff that you're keeping inside is what you're keeping secret from other people. So if you just are doing the journaling and then you decide, well, I'm not going to share any of this. You burn it up or you just hold it in. You've made a step, and it's a big, important step, but I think that there's something about the healing that you need other people. Because what healing means is coming back into the community as a wholesome, working part of the community. And so one of the things that you have to watch in journaling is still not opening up to others. Whereas art, like this book I wrote, it's all over the country. I have to own whatever is in there, so it's a different thing.
Thank you. Karl, I'd like to continue on this discussion a little bit about the arts. And you wrote in What It Is Like to Go to War about, mentioned entering the Temple of Mars and studying the philosopher Sophocles. You speak about Philoctetes there. Tonight, Ajax came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a friend actually who's taken on an entire initiative to bring those two plays specifically to audiences to help explain the veteran experience and post-traumatic stress. And I think that continuing on with that to even greater audiences is very important. In fact, what Sophocles did was they forced the generals to sit in the front rows when the warriors came back from war and talk about their experiences on stage as though they were actually performing what had happened to them, because the generals didn't know. They weren't out there with the troops seeing what was happening on the front lines and the engagements. And I know from my own combat experiences that that's very true. That often somebody is sitting in a JOC or a COC somewhere, doesn't really know what's happening to that young warrior out there, and so can't participate in the healing until that is brought to them front and center. And it just seems to me like if we did that more with not just our generals, but especially our politicians, and then society in general, there would be a greater understanding that would help facilitate the healing of which you speak.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think that one of the roles like of drama, is this Brian Doherty's you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen a couple of his plays, and that's precisely right. Those plays were essentially religious. I mean, and they were meant to do just that. And we have lost a lot of the wisdom of the old cultures because we're so smart now. But the human psyche has not changed in 2,000, 3,000 years. We still need to dramatize a lot of what happens. And one of the things that art, literature, and plays in particular, is, and I think literature even more so, is that it allows somebody to get out of their own skin. When you read a novel that's well done, you identify with the character. And by identifying with the character, you see the world through the character's eyes, not your own eyes. It's one of the very rare places that humans can get outside of their own skin. We are trapped in here. I don't really know what it's like to be you. But I do know what it's like to be a character if it's a well-drawn character, and I can see the world through that person's eyes. And I have a story I tell about this where I learned this. I have the godmother of two of my children was always trying to get me to read Eudora Welty, who's a wonderful Southern writer. And I was like, oh God, Kathy, I don't want to read Eudora Welty, some Southern writer. And she would be after Carl, I'd read her, she's really good. So one day she came in and she had literally slapped this book called Delta Wedding down on the table. She said, you read this or I'll never talk to you again. Okay, so I started reading it. And the story takes place in the Mississippi Delta in the 1920s. And the main character is a woman whose oldest daughter is getting married. And this woman is responsible for the wedding. And first of all, you begin to feel how important the symbol of this wedding is. I mean, Welty is a marvelous writer. I mean, we're talking about civilization. We're talking about male-female. We're talking about the deep archetypal relationships, all symbolized by a wedding. And part of what is going on is that she has decided that she wants to have the flower girls dressed like shepherdesses, and they need the shepherdesses crooks, which are especially made in Memphis. But in those days, there were no highways, but just dirt roads, and the rains had come, and the shepherdess crooks hadn't come yet. And I'm kind of rolling my eyes. By about a quarter of the way through the book, it's like, once again, here's the shepherdess crooks again. Oh God, who cares if she gets the shepherdess crooks? By the time I'm halfway through the book, I'm seeing the world through this woman's eyes and how important it is for her to make this wedding right. And I'm going like, where are the goddamn shepherdess crooks? Why aren't they here? And it hit me. I would not have had that response if I hadn't gotten into her skin. And the medium for doing that was literature. I expanded my consciousness by reading that.
Good.
Thank you again for coming out, Carl. Derek, thank you for you with the Ken Burns documentary. There are more and more revelations about some of the secrets and some of the lies and some of the mistruths or half-truths or whatever the case about the Vietnam conflict. And the question of was it worth it? Not so much was it worth the actions, but was the total involvement worth it? Today, with Iraq and Afghanistan, we're seeing a lot of parallels. We're seeing a lot of similarities. We're seeing American troops and Iraqi troops, or whatever the case may be, going into places that Americans fought for and shed blood. What advice, as somebody who's been through this, what advice would you give today's generation of service members and veterans who are now looking at their own service and their own conflict and going, was it worth it?
Right. The thing that I have learned is that you cannot look at your war experience from the viewpoint of, was it worth it in terms of national goals? Because quite frankly, very few of them are worth it if you look at it that way. Vietnam certainly wasn't. I don't think that Iraq was, and I think the way we did Afghanistan after we chased the Taliban into Pakistan, we should have just left, because it isn't. They're in the 13th century, they're staying there. But what you have to do is look at your experience as, what did it do for my spiritual development, my soul? That is where you make it worth it. You make meaning, you don't find it. That's my opinion. And so the experience of the war is, if you try very hard, I have a lot of friends from the Vietnam War who will argue with me vociferously that it was the right decision. We stopped communism in Southeast Asia. They have all these arguments, and what they're trying to do is make it worth it. Now, I don't buy it. But what I think that the focus is, and the one that is sound and true, is, what was it worth it for me? And it will be worth it for all of us if we make it so. What do you bring back from that horrific experience? How does that help you grow to be a bigger human being? And looking at it as a sort of, I don't know, what do they call it when you temper a sword? You know, that kind of an experience is a soul tempering experience. And then that makes it worth it. But I would find it very hard to justify most of the recent wars on objective national security grounds.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Carl.
Hello.
I too was a platoon leader with Marines in Vietnam. And you wrote the book Matterhorn based on fiction. My question is, how much of that is fiction and how much of it is fact?
Yeah. Well, you know, everything that happens in that book actually happened. I saw 95% of it. The rest of it I heard from a very close friend. I mean, we did lose a guy to a tiger, and my company went out and found what was left. We did have a guy with the dreaded leech in the penis, you know, I mean, that happened. So all of those things actually happened, were true. In terms of the actual battle, I combined two hills, 1306, which is right on the Laotian and DMZ border, and then a hill called 484, which is on Mutter's Ridge. And I sort of amalgamated them together and had the battle, and called that Matterhorn, and had the battle for Matterhorn. But the action in those things is because I'd been there. I'd done the firefights, and so when I wrote about the firefight, I called on my memory of firefights, and I called on my memory of assaults against a fortified position to describe the battle for Matterhorn. It was really the battle for Hill 484 and a little bit of the battle for Hill 1306. So all of that was true. The character Mellis is really based on my older brother, who I said was a real corporate politician. I mean, he was one of these guys. I mean, I ran a corporation in Singapore, and I wasn't as good at it as he was, and I didn't make as much money as he did. And I'd call him on the phone, I go, well, you know, I got this problem over here. And there'd be a pause, and he'd say, well, isn't the problem that your secretary doesn't like the other guy's secretary? Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, he was a genius for that kind of people thing. Well, doesn't your vice president of marketing, isn't he jealous of the finance guy because he got this and he did? Oh yeah, you know. And so that was so he's Mellis. Mellis has this. He is a politician, and I'm not. So his character is based on my brother and another guy who I became very close to. He was a kingmaker in Oregon. he was never in politics himself, but no one would run for office without talking to Bill Robertson. He ran the local utility, Pacific Power, and was just involved in everything, and one of these wise people. And so if someone said, well, I think I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, better talk to Bill. Better talk to Bill. And Bill would go like, well, okay, but if you do it this way, maybe you should, you know. And so knowing these two guys, I sort of threw those into Mellis. And so the things that Mellis saw were the things that I saw, but the character of Mellis is different than me. I'm not a politician. I was not real good at business either. I did okay, but you know, not as well as my brother.
Let's take one more question so we can leave some time for book signing.
Come on. Two quick ones.
You've got the difficult decision.
That's right.
Two quick
All right, two, we compromise. Just don't change who you pick.
Well, you mentioned the Civil War, actually, and I was thinking a lot about Lincoln's second and last inaugural address, where he talks up at the end about binding up the nation's wounds to care for him who shall have borne the battle. And one thing I just wanted to announce to people here is that on Tuesday, May 2nd, we're going to have a talk in this room at 7 p.m. called The Battle for Veterans Healthcare by Suzanne Gordon, which the Veterans Center is sponsoring, and also the College and Humanities Center. But I wanted to ask you what you thought is the meaning of that kind of notion of Lincoln, and also for those battles that people did fight that we think were worthwhile, what is the obligation in a battle like the Civil War to make good on the promises that were made in that war? You know, somebody talked about making sure that freedom was a blessing for the freed. You know, so I wanted to know. You know, there's a lot of talk today about what the meaning of America is in the battle over that.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could just reflect on that. Thank you.
Well, for starters, I mean, I think that we were incredibly fortunate that we had Lincoln. You know, I mean, the guy, you look at his face. I mean, this guy saw a lot.
It's hard to hear you.
Did this go off? Can you hear this? Okay. I was just saying we're very fortunate that we had Lincoln who felt as he did. I mean, he had that attitude when the war was won. He wasn't having victory parades. He was thinking we need to bind the nation's wounds. The other thing is I'm not a pacifist. I think there are times when you have to fight. And, you know, fighting to end slavery was something that was good. That was something that we should remember and honor. And fighting to beat fascism was good. And that's something that we should remember. And we should remember that because we don't ever want to fall into it ourselves. A lot of guys died fighting fascism. So let's make sure we don't do it. And when we watch people doing things that are, you know, against American values, if you remember what people paid for that, I think that you're going to be more careful about it. You know, I mean, I worry about, like, you know, internet, you know, privacy issues and things like that. People died so that I could be free and not have someone, you know, telling me what to do. And I think we forget that at our peril. So I think that we have an obligation for those people that did sacrifice for ideals. And that's where I think we should place our ideas about why and when we go to war. We should go to war. Here's it in a nutshell. It's my view. If there's any threat to government of the people, by the people, and for the people, if that is threatened, that's worth fighting for. Period. Price of oil is not worth fighting for. Whether there's, you know, balance of power in this Middle Eastern country versus that, it's not worth fighting for it. I boil it down to government of the people, by the people, for the people. If someone's going to try and take that away from me, then we go to war. And we have to remember that's what it's about. We lose sight too easily.
Hey, Mr. Marlantes, just wanted to ask your thoughts as someone who's had a handful of years post their time in combat, what you would share in conversation with someone who served in combat and the trauma of their service impacted them so heavily that they struck the position that they feel that time is something that can never heal, them of what they've experienced.
Yeah. Well, I think that they're wrong. And I would try to persuade them otherwise. Because the very attitude that no time will heal this is stopping them from healing. I mean, it's a self-inflicted wound right there. And I think that but to get somebody to accept that who doesn't want to, and you don't know the reasons why, I think you just have to keep hammering at them. And you don't give up. I mean, they're going to say, I'm never going to heal from this. Well, I think you're wrong, and let's talk about it. So let me talk about this. I don't want to do that. Well, I do. Am I your friend or not? Or am I married to you or not? We need to do this. And you just keep at it. Because I think that what you just described is a self-inflicted wound. The very attitude is going to stop the healing. You got to break it. And they're not going to do it themselves unless it's sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous. They finally get down to the point where, it's so bad. They're so isolated and so lonely and so miserable that they'll do it. But I would tend to hope for the other way. You keep holding out the hand until they finally grab it.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.